Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is Giants of Old, Rulers of Today. I just want to start out by saying that today's video is about possibilities. It's about speculation. And I got the idea as I was reading the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2 by Gary Wayne. And so I'm just going to share some interesting things that I learned from the chapter called Giants of Old in this book. Now, as you can see, this book is actually called the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Time Prophecy. I've got to say that since Gary Wayne's futurist eschatology, it differs greatly from my eschatology. So what I have learned as I am reading this book is that Gary Wayne brings in a lot of really great information, but his conclusions sometimes are, well, of course they're going to be influenced by his futurist views. So I don't usually give much credence to a lot of the conclusions that he has, but the research itself is really, really interesting and really fun to read. And before we even get into the giants, I just wanted to share with you something interesting from the beginning of the chapter. That actually reminded me of a video that I recently did about speaking in tongues. And it says, in times past, gibberish was the term often applied as the speech of demons and ancient giants who spoke quickly and often in unknown languages. So in that video, I was saying how a lot of times today, people who claim that they can speak in tongues, that they're speaking gibberish. And that's what I've always called it, is gibberish, because it's unintelligible. But if you actually read in the New Testament, it certainly seems like the people who were speaking in tongues, they were speaking in known languages. They just weren't speaking in their own native languages, and they just had never known it before. So to me, to read that gibberish is actually connected to the language of demons, and to know that there are people, who do just have these episodes where they claim to be speaking in tongues, you have to wonder, are they actually being influenced by demons while they're doing that? I don't know. So a lot of you might be saying, well, demons, what are you talking about, Shelley? Because you're a full preterist, so we shouldn't have demons. Well, you know what? I don't see anything in the scriptures. I could be wrong about demons being destroyed. I do see in the gospels that the demons are asking Jesus if he has already come to torment them, but there is nothing said about demons and being thrown into the lake of fire. And it says about the devil and his angels, but the demons are not angels. Demons, at least according to the book of Enoch, are the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim, and the dead Nephilim, aka the dead giants. And that is what we're going to be talking more about today, is about those giants. So segueing from the gibberish, I found some more interesting information in this chapter, that some of the languages that are spoken actually seem to have derived from an antediluvian root, and that actually has a connection to these giants. And so it says here, similarly, Indo-European languages, alternatively known as Arya, European, Indo-Celtic, and Indo-Germanic, are terms created by scholars to encapsulate related and mysterious languages descended from a common ancestor language of an unknown origin. Indo-Europeans arrived in early secular post-Diluvian history. If you're new here, antediluvian means before the flood, post-Diluvian means after the flood. In Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, it says that there were giants on the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and bore children to them. So That is what we are talking about when it comes to the antediluvian giant, that these sons of God, and they're sometimes called watchers in the book of Enoch, that many believe are actually angelic beings that came down. They fell, so to speak. Well, they did fall, not even just so to speak. They had relations with human women and they bore children, and they turned out to be these Nephilim, these giants. Now, there are some who will argue that they weren't actually giants and that this had nothing to do with the fallen angels. That is the stance that I am taking today. Going on, and this is actually on page 26 of Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, if you were interested in getting it, but this is page 26. Indo-European tribes assimilated with or destroyed cultures such as the Minoans, Babylonians, Cattites, Hittites, Kastites, Mitanni, and are thought to be the Scythians, Persians, and Aryans, the latter having settled the Indus Valley. Both the mysterious history of languages and the various Indo-European tribes are linked to giants. I have done videos before about the Scythians being linked not only to the Nephilim and to the Nephilim bloodline, but also to Tartaria. And whether you consider that to be a grand civilization or just a local nation, the Scythians certainly do seem to have a connection to both. Moving on, it says Indo-European languages conceal an unexplained historical record well before the flood. What is most interesting is that in polytheist lore, the most ancient of the Scythians predate the antediluvian Sumerians. Moreover, tablets found beneath the village of Tartaria in the famous province of Transylvania evidently predate the first Sumerian texts by as much as 1,000 years, according to carbon-14 dating. Now, I'm the first one to say that I don't always trust carbon-14 dating, but this is not the first place that I have heard that there is a connection to these Scythians being actually before the flood and being older than the Sumerians, who we are often told are the oldest civilization. So here are some maps of Tartaria, some ancient maps of Tartaria. And what's interesting is that here we have, yet another piece of literature that is connecting Tartaria to the Nephilim giants, who I have to say, they were not good entities. That is why when they died, their souls became demons because they were not good beings. So when a lot of people try to say that Tartaria was actually a physical 1,000-year millennial kingdom with Jesus at the center of it, I have to say that I strongly disagree with that. Now, I used to believe it, but then someone pointed out to me, they said, Shelley, Tartaria, look at the name. That is very, very similar to the name Tartarus, which is the pit that the fallen angels were thrown in. The ones who well, according to Jude, I believe does it say they defiled themselves? Let's go there and find out what that says. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And that place in the gloomy darkness was known as Tartarus. And again, yeah, it is very similar to the name Tartaria. So if we think about this, if all of those beautiful buildings, not all of them, but I'll say if a good portion of them are connected in any way to Tartaria, I would certainly say that it is more likely that those buildings were built by Nephilim giants and not during 1,000-year reign. Just going to continue reading here. What is extraordinary about this discovery is that the glyphs symbols on the tablets were virtually identical with Sumerian glyphs. Early post-Diluvian Scythians occupied the Balkans, Transylvania, Carpathia, and the Ukraine, indicating that Scythians somehow inherited the antediluvian Indo-European language. Now, what this makes me think of is a video that I did a while back on Vlad the Impaler. And what I discovered in that video is that Vlad the Impaler had links to the Scythians, and he had links to the dragon bloodline. And of course, we all know that, Vlad was from Transylvania. We have Carpathia there. And so, since Vlad the Impaler had this dragon bloodline, which is a known Nephilim bloodline, we have yet another connection to the Scythians with these Nephilim, and we have another connection to even Tartaria with these Nephilim giants. And fun fact, guess who is in the family of Vlad the Impaler? You guessed it, King Charles. He's from the dragon bloodline lineage, and also the House of Windsor. I believe that is what Queen Elizabeth is from, which would also put him there too. Also claims to have this what they will call the lineage of the gods, which would actually be Nephilim. And so I'm just going to say right here, what I actually think is possible is that many of these royal families today who do claim to have royal blood, I'm trying to find the images that I have of these people here. A lot of these royal families claim to have royal blood. We know for a fact that the pharaohs, they claimed to be, gods themselves, or they claimed to be the children of gods. And then there are many European families who claimed to have this godly lineage. Some of them even claim to have been related to Jesus Christ himself. We even have, where is he? We have Kim Jong Un, who also claims to have gods in his heritage. So one thing that we will find with the leadership around the world, and I will often say that some of these leaders, a lot of them, are puppets. And I'm often wondering if the true bloodlines, if they exist, if these Nephilim bloodlines have continued to be passed down over the years, I think that they are actually the ones controlling things. Now, very often, like we know for a fact that King Charles, he doesn't really have much to do over in England, as far as I know. That's what they have the prime minister for. I always think of them as being more for show, but in that case, I certainly do think that if it is true that these royal families, I'm talking about King Charles, I'm not even showing them. Let's find them. There we go. So if anyone does have this blood in them, I would say that it would certainly be these royal families who are just kind of for show, and they're not actually the ones that have anything to do with the government. And I also believe, some people might ask, well, if they're Nephilim bloodline, why are they not giants then? I think that it has definitely watered down over the years, but I still think that they're very, very selective about who they would allow to marry into their family. And we know this is certainly true with the royals. There are certain families that they will allow themselves to be connected with. And this is something that I went over in another one of the videos that I did a while back. And this one was called, Is the Fairy Kingdom Real? Who are they? Because I already talked about the dragon bloodline being of Nephilim origin, but have you ever heard of the Fae? Other people call them fairies. Also Nephilim origin, that also has connections to the whole King Arthur story that many people believe was actually rooted in some sort of real history. We also have Albion. Who has heard of Albion? Albion was very famously in King Arthur, or I used to love Merlin, that show that, well, I still love Merlin, but I love the show Merlin, but what they used to call England very often was Albion. Albion actually derives from the same root word of elf, elven. Elven bloodline is also a Nephilim bloodline. And again, many of these royal families claim connections to them. So if you want to watch more about those, I highly recommend, I'll try to remember to put these at the end of the video, Is the Fairy Kingdom Real? And then I also talked about it again in the Bucharest, Vlad the Impaler, and the Dragon Bloodline videos, because I'm not going to get too much into that today. But I think that a lot of people do know that these royal families claim to have this godly lineage. And by godly, I don't mean holy. I mean lowercase g godly. Continuing on, it says, one cannot clearly comprehend humankind's obscured and often hidden history, religions, and culture unless one adequately accounts for the impact giants and their godfathers imprinted onto the antediluvian and post-diluvian world. Know then, antediluvian giants scripturally described as the mighty ones of old, and the Nephilim were spurious children of the divine ones. Giants described by some monotheist historians as the embodiment of absolute power in the ancient world. Their transflood and transgenerational legacy imposed a worldwide feudal-like class system, state-sponsored polytheism, and controlled polytheist-inspired education system. Dynastic giant royals, along with their siblings, offspring, and cousins, conspired through the generations to impose, enforce, and enslave humankind. An ancient world order I coin as the Nephilim World Order, NWO, in the spirit of their lowercase g god fathers. Now, there are many people who do believe, and Gary Wayne included, and I think it's very possible that these giants were certainly the ones who created a polytheistic religion before the flood, and that during the Tower of Babel at that time, these old religions they were trying to bring these old religions back. These old religions are what many of these secret societies that are around today were actually rooted in, were these, well, I'll just say giant based religions. And he goes on to say, this is page 27 now, Western scientific, historical, archaeological, educational, and Christian hegemony consistently suppress oop arts and all inconvenient history not congruent with their dogma. So oop arts means out of place artifacts. They summarily dismiss the veracity of giants as a collective ancestral figment of the imagination, an unexplained, fantastic mass hallucination experienced on a worldwide scale. Accordingly, many submit that the word giant, as we understand the meaning today, is a wild exaggeration, that giant was understood differently in prehistory, history, and in the Greek language from which the contemporary English word derived. Many in the exaggeration camp assert that giant meant earthborn in ancient Greek culture, and as such, giant was a term that applied to renowned but fully human heroes and warriors. Misinformation and disinformation generally contain some truth, but the totality is inaccurate and designed to deceive. Such is the case with the exaggeration dogma of the word giant and its etymology. I am acquainted with some people who do think that giants were just talking about regular men who were heroes. But my question is always, but what about the size of Goliath? What about the size of the bed of King Og of Bashan? So, and what about, in the book of Joshua, where they say we were like grasshoppers in their sight? It certainly does seem that they were talking about physical giants and not just people that were giant in their deeds and their heroics. The English word giant derives from the Greek gigas and Latin gigant. I'm probably saying this wrong, just so you know. Webster's etymology looks like this. Middle English giant from Anglo-French giant, from Latin gigant and Greek gigas or gigas. The word, I actually think it's good. The word gigantic, according to Webster's dictionary, derives from Latin gigas and gigantes via the Greek word gigas and likely gigantes, meaning giant and giants respectfully. Further, the Jewish encyclopedia ascribes giant as deriving from gigas, as it was translated from Hebrew into Greek in the Septuagint and defined as denoting a man of extraordinary stature. In the English versions, the rendering for three Hebrew words, Nephilim, an extinct, mythological, only semi-human race, inhabitants of the earth before the flood, the progeny of the Bene Elohim and the daughters of men. Know then that, can't see it because I highlighted it now. Know that these highlighters, they actually cover the words instead of helping you to see them. Anyway, know then that gigas and or gias are Greek words meaning giant and giants, words originally used to describe the monstrous race of gigantes in Greek mythology that included Briareus, Centimenes, and Cottus. So what this means, what if you're wondering, is that the Septuagint is the version of the Bible that the disciples and Jesus used in the New Testament. The Septuagint was It was the Greek. It was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So when the Greeks in the Septuagint translated this word, they used the same word that was used in Greek mythology to talk about huge monstrous giants. It was the same word that was used. So for those people who are saying, "Oh, well, it's not actually talking about literally giant people. It's talking just about heroes, but they're just regular men." Well, it's an important thing to know that it was the same word that was used for the actual giants in Greek mythology. And I do have to say that Josephus, among others, said that these giants of Greek mythology and these gods and these titans were one and the same with the Nephilim that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, on page 30. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the term hero originated with ancient warriors and demigods famous for their bravery and deeds, popularized in Greek mythology. Hesiod, according to Herodotus, was a contemporary of Homer circa 900 BC and described heroes in Works and Days as men of great renown. Hesiod further wrote in Goddesses and Heroes in Theogony, Generations of the Gods, that the gods created a preternatural race through procreating with mortals, humans. Does that sound familiar? The spurious offspring were the demigod giants, the divine race of heroes, also called demigods, the race before the present one. They all died fighting in the great wars. And and that is mentioned in the book of Enoch. And second, Zeus, the father of gods and men, or was that the book of giants? Anyway, and then the race of oh, sorry. I distract myself. Second, Zeus, the father of gods and men, mightiest of the gods and strongest by far, and then the race of humans and of powerful giants. The Iliad also documented several demigod warriors and champions, such as Acamas, Achilles, Ajax, and Telamon. Hesiod, though in Theogony, seems to refer to two creations of giants in his account. The first race of demigods, the race before the present one, that died in fighting great wars, was likely a giant race before the flood, created by the parent gods like Kronos, Poseidon, and Iapetus. The latter produced the giants Gog, Magog, and Albion. Remember that word, Albion? That's the derivation of the word elven, before the flood. The second giant race was created by Zeus and other offspring gods after the flood, giants like Hercules, Theseus, and Perseus. Josephus equated Nephilim and Rephaim giants with Greek heroes, and just as Sumerian giants like Gilgamesh were described as heroes. The parent god regime reigned before the flood, and the offspring gods reigned after the flood, whereby the latter celestial mafia reestablished the Nephilim world order with their spurious offspring in a second incursion. And many people believe that there was a second incursion of the sons of God, who then came in and impregnated women after the flood again. And here we have in Greek mythology, there is a second incursion, which has continued down through the generations. It follows then that to comprehend how we arrived at our current societal order. So, I certainly can't say that I know this to be 100% true, but I think that we can certainly speculate that these Nephilim, they certainly could have kept procreating throughout these generations. And just as they were the rulers of their time, they are very likely some of the evil minds behind the goings on of our world today. And now that we've talked about this second incursion that is in Greek mythology, we're also going to talk about the possibility of a second incursion that created these other giants after the flood, because in Genesis 6, like I mentioned before, it does say there were giants on the earth in those days and also after that. And there is some dispute over what exactly that means, because you know what? The Bible isn't very clear about what that means and how there were giants after that. But if we go to page 31, what Gary says is there are three buckets as to how giants show up after the flood. A second incursion by a second group of fallen angels after the flood who were not sent to the abyss for crimes against the laws of creation and against humankind. Now, I know that people like Rob Skiba and there are others who say that there was definitely no second incursion because the book of Enoch does tell us how terrible the punishment was for those watchers who impregnated the human women. He said there is no way, they were so shaken up, there is no way they would do that. Well, if these beings, these angelic beings are anything at all like humans, and I think in a lot of ways they are, look at humans. They don't learn either, do they? We have all of these, like some states have the death penalty for certain crimes, yet people still go out and commit these crimes. Some people, just as I'm going to assume, and yeah, I'm making a big leap, a big speculative leap here, but I'm just going to say, you know what? If they're anything at all like humans, some of them just don't learn, they just don't care, and they think that they won't get caught, which is, I don't know how they could think that because they certainly would be more aware of God living in the heavenly realm with him already, being created for that heavenly realm. But anyway, so B, with the aid of fallen angels that either protected giants in the earth, took giants off the earth, or and then there's a third one, which I actually want to stop here. So it's talking about how the fallen angels could have protected the giants by taking them off the earth or under the earth. Now, I think that this notion of the fallen angels possibly taking helping them, or that they themselves, possibly the giants, finding refuge in the bowels of the earth underground, I think it's very possible. Um, the story of the giant in Kandahar, Afghanistan, that was fairly recent, just maybe a decade or two ago. I don't know the exact year. This giant was living in a cave. And there are many stories associating giants of today and giants, of yesteryear. I'm using a fancy word there. Also associating them with caves and associating them with underground, associating them with the underworld. The Rephaim, in fact, which is what many of the giants were called after the flood. They were called the Nephilim before the flood, Rephaim after the flood. The Rephaim are also associated with the underworld, with Sheol, which to the ancient Jew, that was like a physical place under the ground. So that is certainly a possibility. Now, the third one that he brings up is that there was another ark, and that the fallen angels might have helped them there too. Oh, actually, the last one is okay. This was actually part of that. Gary Wayne thinks it is possible that these fallen angels may have also had another ark for these Nephilim, and it says as detailed with giants like Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Deucalion, son of Prometheus, in the Greek flood story tradition. And yeah, so we do have those two flood story traditions. Is that possible that they actually had their own arcs for it? I think that that is very possible as well. And then C, somehow on the ark with Noah, his three sons, and their unnamed wives. Now, and there is some Jewish lore that Og of Bashan actually stowed away on the ark, and that is how that blood, that Nephilim blood continued. So we just don't know. I think that one is probably the least likely. I'm going to add a fourth one because I talked about this in one of my other videos recently, and I think it's possible that there it was a local flood, and that they just survived it because other people and other beings would have survived it then as well. And I do think that's a possibility. And what's funny is that just a few years ago, if you would have brought up the notion of the ark being local to me, I would have scoffed at it. But I've been reading another book called Beyond Creation Science by Tim Martin and Jeff Vaughn, and that has just been completely eye-opening to me. And I have understood that a local flood really is very, very possible. So I certainly wouldn't put that off the table either for how these giants continue to live after the flood. But anyway, that's really all that I wanted to share with you today. I've been enjoying this book by Gary Wayne. And again, it's hard because he does incorporate so much of his eschatology into his books, and that I incorporate my eschatology into things too, but he believes that we're part of the fig tree generation and that we are the terminal generation, and he's just very, very futurist. And so it's hard for me at times, because I think that one of the notes that I wrote in my book is I would love to get Gary's opinion on this if he would ever come to full preterism, because certainly a lot of his points of view would change if he came to full preterism, and I would just love to hear what he had to say about that too. But that doesn't negate all of the research that he's done. And I do think that I would certainly lean more to the giants being actual giants and not just heroes, as some people think. Now, I could be wrong. That's why I said, this is just kind of a fun video, a speculative video, but I've always enjoyed stuff like this, and I know that some of you do too. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a YouTube member or a channel member, I will leave you a link in the description box for my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.